Hello again, this is the 30th of September 2024 and this is another Aughty Thoughty, me and my spin, which this month has been Rising Damp, the 1970s sitcom. And I'll begin with, sort of what it means to me personally and go through an overview of the character and so on. And then I'm going to get my teeth into the racism. Right. Just a warning in case people don't want to hear about that kind of thing. As I know, not everybody wants to listen to, critical analysis of racism. I mean, to me personally, it's very clearly anti-racist. Whether or not it succeeds, I'm not absolutely sure. But yes, I think it's worthy of some discussion between myself and myself. Right, so I first discovered Rising Damp when I was around 7 or 8 years old. The deal was I would go to my nan and granddad's house a couple of times a week because my mum was a nurse, a single mum, so she worked funny shifts. I got to stay with my grandparents. And my granddad would entertain me by making little compilation videotapes of anything that was on telly in the preceding days that I might be interested in. Sometimes it was nature programmes or, kids' films or things. But what I really enjoyed, what I really looked forward to was sort of repeats of classic sitcoms. And he'd choose ones that he'd enjoyed first time round, things generally from the 1970s. Things like Fawlty Towers and Porridge and so on. And we would just sit and enjoy all these old classic sitcoms together. At the time, they were only sort of 20 years old or so. It'd be like, me showing my kids something like Black Books or My Hero or something. They weren't ancient. But you still sometimes go, oh, he's dead now. Yeah. Oh, look at that old telly. Oh, I used to have a car like that. But to me, it was the first time round. They were still sort of fresh and new and lovely. And I watched them completely uncritically. I watched them for, a group of funny weirdos doing silly things. Just a sort of semi-nonsense story, really. And I can't really describe how much of a big deal this was to me. This was like the highlight of my week, watching some classic sitcoms with my granddad. I really look forward to it. I really look forward to seeing what he had. He used to write it all down on a little piece of scrap paper and put it in the video cassette case in the video cassette case for me, and then I'd read it and, oh wow, Dad's Army! 2 Dad's Armies! Yee! Oh, Holy Fools and Horses! Yay! And I'd be very pleased. And yes, and sometimes it was Rising Damp. I did look up when it was repeated, and apparently it was between 1993 and 1996 the first time it was repeated. So that does add up perfectly well. That's when I was kind of mid-primary school age. But then rewatching it, there were three, maybe 4 episodes that I clearly remembered, and another 1 or 2 that sort of rang a bell. I couldn't necessarily say that I remembered them, but they sort of seemed vaguely familiar. So it was talking maybe up to 6 episodes that I've seen before. But it left a lasting impression on me. Like the theme tune has echoed round in my head for 30 years. On and off. And the characters stayed with me. I can remember when it was in the news that Leonard Rossiter had died. My granddad sort of showed me the article. Oh, look, Rigsby's dead. Every time I hear the word landlord, I just picture Rigsby all my life. That's what it's been. yes, yes, this is the DVD case. This is the DVD that I picked up in a charity shop for £1. As I said, it had always been in my head, I need to have another look at that. I'd like to see all the other episodes. I would like to watch it with adult eyes. Because of course you see a lot more when you're kind of aware that, you know, these are actors performing, this is, you know, a script writer's work. And when you actually understand all the jokes, of course. As I mean, my granddad did a good job of explaining to me what was going on. But you know, in each series that he showed me, but yeah, it wasn't always something that I could relate to as a very small girl. Anyway, yes, this is Rigsby, the central character, played by Leonard Rossiter, of course, who is always a treat. He is the landlord of a very dilapidated boarding house, and I think he's a very Hancockian character. In fact, the whole feel of the show is very Hancockian. I mean, I wonder if Eric Chappell, the writer, the first germ of an idea for him was, wonder what's going on at 23 railway cuttings these days. I mean, they're not identical characters. They do share a lot of characteristics. They're both sort of lacking self-awareness, quite arrogant, snobby, consider themselves in charge, look down on others a little, always trying to make a good impression and failing. Could actually come across as being a nasty piece of work. But somehow through clever writing you end up, if not liking them, then at least, you know, feeling that there's someone you would invite into your house once a week for a funny story. Sort of more pitiable than likeable, really. Both sort of big losers who don't seem to realise that they live in absolute shitholes, and even the buttons on their cardies have resigned in disgust. Yes, Rigsby is a sort of eccentric, cantankerous kind of character. And the ongoing story is that he's in love with his tenant. Where's my camera? There she is. This is Miss Jones. And now I think she's a really interesting character, actually, and I really like Miss Jones. Again, she is one of those sort of hubristic characters who's, well, it's sort of revealed later on that she's from, you know, quite a wealthy family and somehow fallen on hard times and had to take a little bed sit in a grotty boarding house. And again, she just seems to be a bit away with the fairies, really. She's very into the whole sort of performative femininity business, but is very bad at it. Yeah, I imagine, you know, if it had been made 20 years earlier, she might have been played by Joyce Grenfell. You know, she's actually played by Frances Delator, who I wasn't really familiar with, but my husband said her name as if he recognised from somewhere, I don't know. Apparently she's quite she's more of a theatrical actress, as I understand, than a TV actress. The show began, apparently, as a stage play by the name of The Banana Box, which we will come to later, which I haven't seen, haven't read a script for it, so I can't really say how close it was to the eventual sitcom. But yes, it was popular, and so the sitcom was born. Yeah, I think Miss Jones is... she's quite an underrated character, really. I think she is... she's very much an individual and makes her own decisions and knows her own mind and so on. But she's clearly sort of suffering from depression, at least. I wonder if she has a borderline personality disorder. She's sort of very emotional. She suddenly gets a crush on any man who comes her way, except for Rigsby, of course. and very over the top with everything. She sort of reminds me of a lot of people I've met. Although she is very larger than life, being a sitcom character, she does remind me of quite a lot of people I do know. So I find her quite, believable and familiar in that respect. Yes, the sort of third character, maybe. I'm not sure about the other two. This dude here, this is Alan. He's a student who is renting a room in the house. Yes, Miss Jones works at the university, dealing with student accommodation. So clearly she has got this place for Alan. And he's an interesting character as well. He's a medical student. He's also sort of quite into left-wing activism. And he's sort of a bit shy and nerdy and doesn't have much luck with girls. I sort of had him down as the nice character. The one who actually takes some responsibility sometimes and, is probably the most likeable one, generally. But, then there was the episode in which he brings a date home and tries to ply her with sedatives. Yeah, went off for him a bit after that. There is another one where he's sort of spying on Miss Jones getting undressed through a hole in the floor. So, yeah, okay. Yeah, pretty cringe. Other major character is Philip, the African prince, played by Don Warrington, who I understand is still knocking about. I'm sure I saw him quite recently. When I say quite recently, it might be any time in the last 15, 20 years, advertising coffee. But he plays another really interesting character. Can't really compare to any other character. He is he's a black guy who comes into a house where lots of racist white people live. So that it will lead quite nicely into the analysis of the racism, talking about him. But they're all kind of racist towards him in their own individual ways. Like Rigsby is just blatantly outright making little quips about bananas and bongo drums. Miss Jones sort of fetishises him quite a lot. She clearly had some sort of liaison with him at some point, which she refers to as white on black. Now, it's never really revealed whether they had a one-night stand or a date, or they just sort of had a flirty conversation or what. But it clearly had a big effect on her, and she's obsessed with him, but he's not interesting her. Whereas Alan, he's sort of quite right on, as they said in those days. But he wants to make a good impression and show off how not racist he is, but he still sort of gets tongue-tied every time he has to say blah, 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 blah. What's it like being blah, blah, blah? And what Philip does to retaliate, to show them all up, he tells them these yarns about how he's the son of a chieftain and he's got magical powers and he's got 10 wives. But they're all very tall stories, but the others just sort of lap them up. And clearly it's sort of saying, oh, look at all these silly white people who are so racist, they'll believe that any black man is a sort of tribal, living a traditional tribal lifestyle in Africa and just sort of happens to come to England to, I don't know, study at our university and take our boarding house rooms. I don't know what they're assuming. Probably something different, each of them. But then the big joke is that he's sort of more urbane and suave and educated, and clever and sexy and everything than any of them. It's certainly got shades of Till Death Us Do Part in it, which was still showing at the time. It was slightly earlier. It started in, I think 1968, Till Death Us Do Part, whereas this was 1974 to 78, but it was still on. So obviously people would have compared it to that sort of let's all laugh at the silly racist kind of humour. I think if you compare Rigsby to Alf Garnett, he does suddenly become quite good-natured and gentle, really. But yeah, he is a big dirty racist. Yeah, the reaction is Philip just sort of rolls his eyes and takes it in his stride. Alan kind of stands up to him a few times and tells him, you're a reactionary, you're being a bigot, And I think the really interesting thing, it wasn't, something that was particularly clever of the writers or anything, but the thing that just makes it so current, so prescient, is that Rigsby responds in one episode by saying, I'm probably not going to say the exact words, but his line is, "Oh, you can't say anything anymore. Look what they've done to Enid Blyton. You can't read her books anymore because there's gollywogs in them." I was like, oh my God. Isn't that just, every comment on any YouTube video that deals with anything vaguely political in 2024? Oh, you can't say anything anymore. Oh, remember when we used to just have a laugh and have fun? Oh, so-and-so's been cancelled. Oh, God, it's so sad for them. How awful that they only wrote a really racist book, and now no one's allowed to read their really racist book anymore, except if you just go into a shop and buy it, of course, but we're not really allowed to, or something. Yeah, that was 50 years ago. That was from the 1974 series. Apparently Don Warrington did actually say in an interview once that it held up a mirror to how society was at the time. I'd argue that it's not changed one bit. I think, all these characters still very much exist. Probably in more or less the same concentrations they always have. It's a bit depressing, really, that how far we haven't come in half a century. I don't know that. Have there been any more let's laugh at the stupid racist comedies since? I can't really think of any. I think if it was done today, it'd be sort of seen as being quite shocking and edgy. And that, oh no, don't say that, please don't say that, just seems kind of humour. Seems, very, very fresh and very innovative every time it happens. Like, do you remember when The Office was new? And, everyone was talking about how clever it was, the humour in, this man who just blurts out the worst possible thing at the worst possible time. And then, they said the same thing about Alan Partridge. Oh, he's such a great character, he's so funny, he just says, the thing he's totally not supposed to say. And it's the same with, Peep Show and Father Ted and so on. It's that same humour of people saying completely the wrong thing that, it sounds so clever until you realise how many times it's been done when you actually sit and count. Yeah, Rigsby's one of them. Rigsby is definitely one of them. Does it succeed as a sort of anti-racist device? Well, clearly it doesn't, because as I say, racism is still a strong force 5 decades later. I don't. What I could really do with would be, you know, a couple of black friends who I know well enough to say, why don't you watch this with me and tell me what you think of how it depicts race relations in mid-late 20th century UK. But I don't actually have any of them, I'm afraid. I myself sort of enjoy it because I like laughing at silly racists, but I can see why someone else would not want to hear that, just not want to hear all the bongo drums and mud huts and so on kind of humour. But I think it works. It works because, you know, obviously Philip is, you know, such a calm, clever, sophisticated sort of character, and the three white people are all sort of pathetic losers, really. So, you know, when Rigsby is saying, our people civilised your people, you know, it's funny because, you know, he's a waste of space talking to, you know, a very a man who's far more civilised than he can ever dream of being. And it's kind of funny as well because they all lap up these stories that he tells of living in darkest Africa. He's never more specific. He just says, "Oh, I live in Africa." He doesn't say whereabouts in Africa. It's just all one place. You know, Africa's just some mystical land. You know, and nobody questions it. Nobody questions how he's sort of living in England, speaking sort of perfect English with quite a posh accent. You know, immersed in English culture as if it's perfectly natural to him. If he's spent his formative years, you know, sort of living in a mud hut throwing spears at Gazelle. I mean, we could sort of tie up in knots asking, you know, is the presumption that, you know, African culture, you know, sort of traditional historic African culture is lesser than European culture, and so that's what the humour comes from, or you know, what are we actually saying when we talk about civilization, sophistication, education, and so on. I think you know, it is something that, you know, you could examine and argue back and forth for a very long time. You know, is it politically okay? Does it work? Would watching, well, any kind of humour, be it Rising Damp or Till Death Us Do Part, or you know, anything with that kind of you know, showing racist stuff to be stupid, would, if, you know, someone who holds those beliefs watched that, would they actually think, yeah, actually I do sound a bit stupid? Or, you know, would they sort of see, you know, that character as being heroic when they're supposed to look like an idiot? It's like everything else in this sort of situation, it is very difficult to sort of gauge how other people would respond to it, and that is probably the probably ultimately the measure of whether it succeeds or fails as an anti-racist piece. I think it depicts gay characters quite well. I'm pleasantly surprised by how it depicts gay characters. There's only two. Right. There's one where there's an election coming up, and Alan and Phil decide they're going to help the Labour candidate with some canvassing. And he comes round to the house. He's like obviously a 1970s high camp kind of gay coded character. And Rigsby's going, oh, he's a big puff, and but the thing is, he's just depicted as being perfectly competent, perfectly good at his job, not creeping on anybody or anything like that. He's just a perfectly nice character who happens to be really, really gay. So I think that works quite well, and the way that Rigsby is sort of disgusted by him just because he's sort of a bit campy, is it sort of clearly shows up that, Rigsby is the idiot in this situation. He's sort of being judgmental and pathetic, And the other one is when an actor comes to stay, who's sort of very theatrical, and he wears a fancy cravat and everything, and sort of Rigsby takes this to mean that he's gay as well, and he's talking to Alan saying, do you think he's a bit, do you think he's a bit like that? Do you think he's like one of them? Do you think he's a bit, and again, this is the interesting thing about Alan as a character. He starts off going, oh, so what if he is? Who cares? But then when this actor tries to talk to him, he suddenly starts going, I'm going to go and play rugby. I'm trying very hard to look as not gay as possible. I'm putting on my very deep voice. And hurries out of the room. But then the actor asks each of them in turn to come down and help him perform his scenes, and he asks Rigsby to come and fill in for one of the partners in a romantic scene. And the actor's sort of coming close to him, putting his arm around him, yes, oh, kiss me, moi. And Rigby's obviously absolutely disgusted. So, yeah, that's he's kind of getting his comeuppance because, he is sort of a bit forward with a lot of the women in the show. But then, of course, it turns out in the end that the actor is actually after Miss Jones. He's not gay at all. So oh, shock horror. The actor with the fancy cravat and the nice clothes is not actually gay. Who'd have thought? So I think it's sort of quite good on its depiction of homophobia. It's the treatment of women again is very this or that. It could go either way. I mean. I have described how Rigsby looks on Miss Jones as a love interest, and then gradually over the course of several series, she goes from being completely indifferent to him to actually agreeing to marry him. Spoiler alert! Yeah, very very late, belated spoiler alert. I'm sorry. I'm not crazy about keep pestering her and eventually she'll give in. Romantic storylines, but does this one kind of get a pass because sort of Rigsby gradually becomes a more sympathetic character as time goes on? He becomes nicer. I don't know. Of course, he sort of tries it on with other women. He does more than once sort of launch himself at her in a way that. As someone who's had that happen to me a few times, it is not romantic or seductive or funny in any way. Again, cringe. Yeah, and as I say, there's the sort of episodes where Alan's trying to bring dates home and goes a bit beyond being a sort of shy, awkward young lad who doesn't really know what he's doing. I don't know, but then Philip is sort of probably the most conventionally attractive person in the house. And so he sort of quite often talks about how he went out on the pull and he met this girl and so on. And he talks about it as if it's perfectly natural and he just sort of behaves like a human being, and that's how he just sort of picks up girls right, left and centre. Is it feminist? And Miss Jones, as I say, is a very strong character who makes her own decisions and is, you know, an individual in her own right. You know, that's good. We like that kind of thing. There are women that come and go as extra housemates. You know, sort of renting the rooms and things, who are a variety of characters. But again, they all sort of end up being judged by their sexiness by the male characters. I don't know. Again, you can say, you can and ah about everything in it. It's and of course, it's 50 years old. What is the baseline standard from 50 years ago? Considering that, it's not bad, really. I mean, the 1970s was like a cultural sinkhole in terms of feminism because, of course, late 1960s, the sort of censorship relaxed on what was considered, you know, inappropriate for television. You know, more kind of sexual humour was allowed, but there was very little sort of protection for women and minorities from kind of abuse or sexual harassment or anything like that. So that certainly came later. So the kind of long 1970s, let's say, was a place where you could, at least in the media, sort of abuse and degrade women quite a lot more than you could before or afterwards. But that said, it's again, this is another interesting thing about watching media from 50 years ago. What was allowed, what was not allowed, what was considered normal. And quite often you see the three male characters sort of sitting talking about what girls they like, who they fancy and so on, giving each other advice or competing with each other. And they never swear, they never kind of use any kind of degrading language. I think the most lewd it ever gets is when Rigsby's brother turns up, who's like a bit of a bad boy, you know, the black sheep of the family, and he says to Rigsby, "Oh, I thought you liked birds with massive knockers." And that's about as dirty as it gets. Nobody ever swears. It's interesting. They make up. Well, I say they. I mean, sort of Rigsby obviously makes all these sort of racist jokes. Hardly an episode goes by without some sort of comment about, you know, playing bongo drums and throwing spears and living in mud huts and so on. But then he never actually uses any racial slurs. And it makes me wonder, is that something that just wasn't allowed on TV? Or was it something that, you know, the writer and the actors and the production team weren't happy with? I don't know. Anyway, there are 4 series. The first was in 1974. Second in 1975. Then they had a break in 1976, and I don't know why. Presumably it was too hot. And the third in 77 and the fourth in 78. And each one has its kind of own distinct personality. I mean, I think sitcoms that do go on more than sort of 3 or 4 series, do tend to degenerate into just sort of streams of, almost dream sequences of nonsense, or turn into soaps and become kind of very serious and issuesy, and either way they sort of lose the complete, the feel of the original, and the characters all just go to pot, and there's nothing really to love anymore. The first series, it's very much focused on the 4 characters and the sort of racism element. I don't know if it was that the first series was most closely based on the play, and then you got a second series and had to sort of move on from that. But yeah, it's very much about the 4 characters sort of living together in this house, and Rigsby being racist towards Philip, and Philip sort of tricking them by pretending he's a African prince. Again, how long have people been fraudulently claiming to be Nigerian princes? Anyway, there is a bit of the sort of romance between Rigsby and Miss Jones, but obviously, she's not interested in him at all. She's just interested in any other man that walks through the door. What I find about the first 2 series really is that there isn't really a lot of distinction between the episodes. They all have the sort of the same theme, and there is a bit of a storyline in each one, but it's kind of woven into this overall overarching, not exactly storyline, because it doesn't progress, but this sort of theme of, first of all, let's say, guess who's coming to dinner. It's very like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. This sort of very, very, very attractive, very intelligent, very cultured, educated black guy has turned up and shown up all the white people who are judgmental of him. Then number 2, series 2 turns more into Love Island. It's more about the romances between them and the way it's all developing. And it does mean that Alan gets left out a bit, because he's not part of this love triangle between Rigsby and Miss Jones and Philip. But he does, halfway through, get a girlfriend, and Miss Jones leaves the show for the second half of series 2. Apparently it's because Frances de la Tour had some theatre work. So she was unable to, which does make me wonder how long it took to sort of write and cast and film each episode. Had she organised this theatre work before? Did they know she was going to be leaving halfway through? Did they just have to sort of give her lines to someone else? Anyway, she leaves halfway through. She meets someone else and gets engaged, and so she goes off to get married. And she's replaced by a girl called Brenda, who comes in as Alan's date. And there's sort of a bit of will they, won't they, but she's not as bothered about him as he is about her. At one point, she actually agrees to go on a date with Rigsby, which I think is a bit unbelievable, let's say. And again, she's really interesting from a feminist perspective, because she works as a nude model, and she sort of has to explain, I'm not like that, I'm not slutty because I'm a nude model. And I think it's another of those things that you could argue back and forth. Is it showing that, is it supposed to be sort of presenting a woman who she does a job that she might be judged for harshly, but she sort of feels she has to explain herself away and prove that she's not like this? Or is it that, we, that is the audience, are assumed to assume that she is a bad person because she's a nude model? Yeah, again, it's one of those things you could just tie yourself up in knots. What was intended, what would have been sort of the expected response. It does make it quite difficult. Why does she have to explain herself? Why can't everyone just sort of treat her like a person who happens to have an interesting job? And she's okay. She's okay as a character. She's not Miss Jones. You know, I just miss Miss Jones, really. She's not particularly funny as a character, but Miss Jones actually is. You know, she gets some good lines. Yeah, and then there's a break. Then series 3 comes on, and Miss Jones is back. She didn't get married in the end. The engagement is off, so she's come back to the boarding house. And she begins the series by just sort of running into Rigsby's arms, giving her a big hug. And I don't know. I don't know if this is the point when, you know, the sort of beginnings of a relationship starts. But certainly Rigsby becomes a much more likeable character in series 3. He sort of seems more kind of heroic, and they turn down the little racist comments as well. I think the first episode of series 3, Miss Jones has come back after a long absence, and Rigsby has been on holiday, so he doesn't know what's been going on. And there's also a family who've moved into another room, and the woman has a baby. And then, well, obviously it's sitcom land, you know, there's a bit of a mix-up, and Miss Jones ends up looking after the baby for a minute, and Rigsby accidentally assumes that it is hers. And so he starts being the stepdad that steps up, you know? Which is presumptuous. It's presumptuous, yes, but it's also sort of sweet, and it shows a different side to him. And then there's series 3. The episodes are much more individual, sort of cellular. Each episode they get a different housemate in the spare room who sort of brings their own set of challenges. And it's quite dark as well. It gets very dark. There's one where the new tenant is planning suicide, and they have to try and stop him from killing himself. And there's one where they believe the extra tenant is dead, and it turns out that Rigsby has been saving a coffin for himself that he just got as a fantastic bargain once. And anyway, all sorts of crazy stuff happened. And I think series 3 is my favourite because when I sit down to watch a sitcom, what I want to watch is a bit of semi-nonsense about a load of idiots acting daft, you know. And series 4 focuses much more on the sort of developing romance between Rigsby and Miss Jones. I don't know if it was something that was always meant to happen, or something that, you know, viewers wanted to happen. It doesn't really follow on from the first 2 series, where Miss Jones is either completely oblivious to Rigsby's attention or sort of fending him off with a water siphon. Yeah, by series 4, it is focused much more on them as a developing couple, and Alan isn't in it. Apparently, Richard Beckinsale, the actor that played him, was away doing some other theatre shows at the time. So there's no Alan. That sort of makes it feel quite claustrophobic, I think, having less characters. And And there was also a film, and the film, no, don't bother with the film. Absolutely awful. You know, you'd hope, oh, there's a film, it's going to be like an extra long episode, you know, maybe the house is going to be knocked down and they all have to work together to try and save it or something. Or, you know, maybe it's an epilogue, you know, Rigsby and Miss Jones are married and they go and have an adventure together and, you know, meet some old friends on the way. And so, no, it's nothing like that. It's clips, you know, little scenes and lines from the comedy series strung together into a string. And of course, Alan isn't in it because Richard Beckinsale died. He died in 1979, and the film, oh, well, it was being made in 1979. It was released in 1980. And the only thing, there's a few minor elaborations, but the only sort of major difference is at the end, Philip is actually forced to admit that no, he's not Nigerian. He well, say Nigerian, he's not specific. I'll say it as say Nigerian because I'm kind of thinking of the Nigerian prince scam. He's not African at all. He's from Croydon. Okay, just in case anybody was wondering, you know, if anyone didn't quite get that joke. Because as I say, Alan isn't in it, so he's replaced by somebody else called John, who's very bland. And even the actors look like, you know, they've done this before. They've done this enough times. They've had enough of these characters. They've had enough of this setting. It's why are we doing this? And they've used a different house, and that the house looks sort of fairly clean and well maintained. It's nothing like the one in the show. You just think, what's the point of that? The whole setting of the show is that, you know, that the house is kind of falling down around them. That's completely pointless. Why did they do that? I'm winding down. I'm going to call it a night. It's 48 minutes. Right, I'm going to call it a night. There are actually 2 fanfics on AO3. 2 Rising Down fanfics. It does occupy an odd place in the sort of sitcom Hall of Fame. Apparently, it was voted 27th best sitcom ever. You know, in the early 00s when top 10 of this, top 100 of that, top 50 of the other was all the rage. It was voted 27th best sitcom on ITV ever. And it's one of those that, you know, some people sort of vaguely have heard of, but nobody really seems to list it in the favourites, apart from my granddad, who is dead now, so it doesn't really count. And me, of course. But yes, I'll leave it at that. I will leave it at that. Thank you and good night.